Hello, good evening, Andy. Good evening, everybody. So today we'll have a good conversation with Andy Karsner. Andy is senior strategist uh, at Google X, now named X. Andy is also founder and executive chairman of Elemental Labs. That we'll talk soon about that. Quite interesting initiative. He's also member of the board of MIT Media Lab, member of the board of Applied Materials, and a number of energy scholar at Stanford University, and many other functions and titles. If I would say all of them here, Andy, we would spend the whole hour talking about your CV. So I'll keep it for short. But on a summary, one of the brightest minds that I ever talked, and a good friend. So Andy, welcome, and very nice talking to you here.
Thanks, Andres. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, first, Andy, let's talk about the overall U.S. environment before we talk about energy or innovation. What is your where you are specialized? Let's first, on a macro view, we just had U.S. elections, or for some, we are still having elections in U.S. What's your take of the elections? What was the message of the society, and how you see the short-term evolution of the election results in U.S.?
Well, if you take President Trump's own assessment of what it means when he got 306 electoral votes, he called it a landslide 4 years ago. And Joe Biden has exactly the same total that President Trump won in the Electoral College 4 years ago. So I don't hear him calling it a landslide anymore. But by any measure, it's significant. Much more importantly is the popular vote, which most countries use rather than this sort of archaic system that our founders left us with, is Joe Biden has an overwhelming majority, in excess of 5.5 million votes, and still sort of climbing. And, Hillary Clinton, by contrast, got just over half of that amount in her popular vote victory. So by the popular total and electoral college total, it's fairly significant. But we do have this ancient system of electing the electors who will meet on December 8th and then confirm it on December 14th. And then Congress will be inaugurated January 5th and the president on January 20th. Right now, quantitatively, that should be pro forma. The president seems to be flirting with the idea that he may not remain president, at least in his mind. There's absolutely no way he can remain president. But I think his lack of concession, which is new and unusual, is sort of commensurate with the way he's managed himself generally throughout. And of course, he gets to remain fundraising for all of these court and legal battles whilst he's in protest mode. So I think you can expect the protest mode to go on until it's advantageous for him to no longer be in protest mode. But it's resolved. And the new president-elect and his transition team are already functioning. There's a great deal of experience in the policy circles that he's assembled. He's been bipartisan in his outreach, so it's not simply an ideological revolution. He's really quite the pragmatist and centrist. That's not to say that's where his whole party is, but that's where the person who's carrying the banner for the party is. And that's really what they needed to take back the Rust Belt states that Trump had taken away from the Democratic Party, the so-called blue wall. So it's an interesting moment of clarity that we're going to a new place that looks remarkably like an old place, but with completely new circumstances. It's not unimportant that the Republicans did very well in the election. They lost the presidency, but they did far better than any of the polling or pundits had projected. So this is still a very divided country. They're not overly excited about left-leaning economics coming off of a boom, but they want a sense of normalcy and a sense of practical problem solving, and to remove the daily exhaustion of tweeting and some of the other excitement this administration's given us. So time will tell whether the polarity is brought in towards greater convergence. That takes wins, that takes popular buy-ins where lots of people are winning together, or whether it will exacerbate, because the country is, I think I can truthfully say, as deeply divided as any time I've seen in my lifetime.
But it continues to be like this, and we could conclude that the result of the election is, for example, as markets read it, probably in a very positive way, that somehow the Senate keeping Republican was a signal that, well, people don't want too much left-wing economic policy. On the other hand, a clear traditional centrist that Biden represents could be read as America coming back to part of one of the key sources of its success through history, which is 200 years of political consensus, right? So we could declare with these results that we are back to this track, or the phenomenon that brought Trump 4 years ago, made Trump president, is still there, hidden somewhere, didn't disappear, and we have a chance of coming back. How you see the position? Market is right, or eventually this phenomena can come back to haunt us?
I think it's a good observation, but I think the answer to the question is performance related, right? In other words, how this new administration performs will matter. One thing is certain: this country does better with divided government than it does with united government. In other words, the opportunities for sensible deal making and compromise that push us towards the center are better than the results of when ideological mandates may exist with the whiplash to the right or to the left. And we are coming off of whiplash from 4 years ago, which is coming off of the big Obama revolution in 2008. I mean, when you think of it, and these have been increasing iterations of polarity. Right. I mean, we had a period when I was a kid that the Democrats were in charge for 30, 40 years in Congress. It was unthinkable to have Congress change hands, like the Congress Party in India. You know, it wasn't going to happen. And on the other hand, the Republicans ran the presidency, ran the table for 4 out of 5 presidents. If they hadn't had Watergate, they probably would have had all 5. But the iterations are rapid, increasing, and dramatic. So when Obama took office in 2008, he had the largest majority since Franklin Roosevelt in 1932. So, you know, the largest sweep in of power in both houses. He finished his presidency in 2016, himself relatively popular, but the Democrats had lost more seats and more power than at any time in their history. You know, they were the smallest they had ever been in 2016, and that ushered in the Trump era with this meaning a massive Republican sweep in, and now that has shrunken down considerably. So this election has represented the unusual restoration of equilibrium, and now the question is: have we atrophied the skill sets over 20 years for Congress to functionally know how to transact the business of legislating government? Because we haven't actually had real legislation for a long time. I mean, I left office in 2008, and the last comprehensive bipartisan energy acts in our country that for the statutes that guide energy policy to this day were signed by the president in December of 2007. We haven't had anything in 13 years. We haven't had the ability in 13 years to talk across party lines or do anything than fundraise in silos to create new statute. Well, when you create a statute, at least it's intended to be, hopefully when it's done right, that there's sufficient buy-in that it withstands court adjudication, that it sends a predictable signal to the marketplace for capital formation, that people have a catalyst and a North Star and understand the policy guardrails and parameters in which they can invest reliably for return over a period of time. And that helped yield so much over the last 10, 15 years. But here's what we didn't have in 2007: artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, sensors, the Internet of Things. The government is substantially lagging where it needs to be to provide a North Star so that it doesn't become obsolescent in the decision-making circles in the other epicenters of power that are important in financial communities that you're in New York and London and in Asia and in the technological communities that I'm in Silicon Valley and Boston and Austin, and elsewhere. So government needs to demonstrate some minimum level of efficacy. Right now, for the most part, people look at government and say, can we contain them to doing no harm? If we could just get the government to do no harm, that would be a win. Okay. And actually what we need when you're in the middle of what can only be called wildfire, we have actual ecological wildfire in Brazil. You've seen it, Australia, California. We have a world that is burning and actual climatic events that don't care about your party and your politics and your sovereignty and your jurisdiction. We have biological wildfire. We have an out of control global pandemic in a 100-year event that has wreaked havoc economically across the globe. And I would argue in the United States, we have sociological wildfire, that we have large pockets of population who do not understand each other, who do not have a productive dialogue together, and whose friction has come to a boiling point that we don't know what the ultimate manifestations of that friction is. So the new president-elect has his handful, and he needs to figure out a way to catalyze Congress into action that is productive. So in that sense, I think the markets are saying is pretty good if we don't have an ideological sovereign, and instead we have a forced discussion for problem solving. And now everybody's watching and saying, let's see if they can actually do it. So I think performance will yield confidence. Non-performance will hurt confidence. But everybody right now is, can you first do no harm? Can you get the government back to neutral instead of giving us whiplash about what to do?
Yeah, no, that's a very good analysis. Moving to external consequence of the election, I'll be more. Of course, we should expect from Biden a more multilateral world that is extremely positive, right, for Brazil, Latin America, emerging markets, and of course for US. But how this can bring US-China relationship to a new level? What's your expectations on that? Because of course there are legitimate questioning about China growth and certain concessions that need to be done in China. But how you see this new US-China relationship in a more multilateral world?
I think it's obviously the most challenging thing on the foreign policy agenda. I think people have mischaracterized it as a Cold War, right sentiment, wrong characterization, in the sense that the Cold War, you had ideological opposites who were largely driven by geopolitical weaponry and face-off, but economically it was deeply asymmetric. It always was. So you could fight occasionally about the value of the Bolshoi Ballet and cultural superiority and we'll bury you and all this other stuff. But in retrospect, I think we all agree that command economy, the global Comintern, Marxism never really had a chance. You know, you can aggregate a lot of resource and spend a ton of it on weaponry and have friction points around the planet in a world that's been weakened from World War. That's not the same thing at all that we're dealing with the Chinese. With the Chinese, you know, we are facing something that we encouraged and cultivated, which is the greatest rise in prosperity in the shortest period of time for the greatest amount of humanity ever undertaken. And so that is going to cause a lot of dislocation and a lot of opportunity. You know, I lived and worked and studied in China for 6 years, and I had always been a fan historically of constructive engagement. And in my heart, I am still deeply biased towards constructive engagement. But this era that Xi has brought into China, where his own power probably eclipses the power that Mao had concentrated, and that we have had this unusual president of our own who has a penchant for totalitarian bromance, and so had sort of an odd relationship of love and competition with China, and yet a dearth of strategy. You know, I mean, I think the Chinese viewed Trump's engagement as very predictable, very binary, lacking in nuance, lacking in strategy. So that means the new team is going to have to devise those things. China is a sophisticated global player that has, in the words of one of my friends from China, has got the maturity and hormones of a adolescent, and hasn't quite made itself out to be when it is a mature superpower. So it wants to still hang on to some of the past and doesn't know how to be responsible into the future. And I don't know whether we can be helpful and constructive and engaged with the destructive period of relations we've just come through. I know that politically, Biden and the Democrats won't have a lot of latitude to be substantially different in a hard line towards China, but I think they have a greater probability of positive outcome if they can carefully navigate with nuance and sophisticated diplomacy. But it's a new era, and we don't know, because Xi is not Deng Xiaoping or Jiang Zemin or Zhu Rongji or any of the more practical thinkers that have come before. He has a penchant for autocracy. We saw this week with the ant offering, just immediate government interventionism with making clear the autocrat will speak, and this is how the rules will be formed. Which is sort of bizarre, because that was an enormous opportunity for China to demonstrate its capacity to attract capital. So I'd love to say that that as a China expert and an old hand, I know how this is going to evolve, and I can give you with foresight. I can't, and anybody who can is lying, or selling books. Okay. I mean, the reality is it remains, I think Lord Mountbatten said, an enigma wrapped in a riddle that's inside of a mystery. It's all those things. But here's what we know. It's a quarter of humanity. It has tremendous economic capacity. Its technological capacity has arisen to first world competition. There's an ambition to go higher. There is some modicum of global outreach, both through soft diplomacy and hard military, that is unprecedented in modern China's history. And it has yet to make up for itself the identity of who it wishes to be. I think the identity of who it wishes to be and who it ultimately becomes has by necessity, some degree of reliance on how it is treated and engaged by others. And so this is why I think the return to multilateralism, the collaboration with Europe and Brazil, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, the rest of our allies that are important counterparties to China is as important as the direct engagement with China itself.
I agree. Totally agree. Well, Andy, moving more to science, where you are a specialist. Well, we went through this incredible event of this pandemic, right? Which none of us could forecast, even though that you have some very close science fiction describing what we are living in the last months. What's your take on pandemic? In one side, we are living basically worldwide in Europe, US, Latin America, a kind of second wave. On the other hand, we are getting closer and closer to new vaccines, right? We got the announcement of Moderna yesterday. Last week was Pfizer, and we have, as you know, Brazil and US are the most active pandemic sites with scale. So most of the protocols are being tested in our countries, right? So we are close to the action, and we are optimistic with the vaccines. But how you are seeing this new second wave with vaccines coming probably first quarter of next year? Pandemic, from a practical point of view, is behind us, or we still have lots of challenge ahead of us?
Yeah, that's a good question. I obviously it's the question of the day. Well, let's start with the vaccines. And I commented to you before that the success of a vaccine is not tantamount one-to-one with the success of a vaccination campaign. And it is the success of a vaccination campaign that will be the determinant of the restoration of normalcy. And so even before you get to the actual physical, scientific, logistical characteristics of a campaign where you could map out the time frame of reasonableness to get to critical mass to have a herd immunity through vaccination. Even before you arrive at that point, one needs to quantify and discount the amount of resistance in the population to onboarding or accepting or taking the vaccine itself. Now, I don't know about Brazil, but I know in the United States, this thing called an anti-vax movement is robust, it's deep, it predates COVID, and it has been deeply strengthened by this president. That a conspiratorial suspicion towards the government in offering something that alters some aspect of your physical self distributed by the government meant to make you better, but that may be adopted by law that you should take it. This plays into this sociological polarity that we have in the United States. And the only thing I can say about it from my perspective is that we are sadly reaping the harvest of 50 years of underinvestment in education. You know, all of the resistance to the vaccine, let alone to wearing a mask. I mean, if you poll the Trump 70 million people that voted for Donald Trump, about 2/3 of them are opposed to wearing masks. Okay, because it's abrogating their rights and their freedom and their liberty, and they're being told this every day on primetime news broadcast, and so the probability that they're going to be raising their hands to jump in line and be vaccinated is relatively low. But we don't know the measure of that. I don't suspect it's 70 million, but let's say it's half of that. Let's say it's 10 or 20% of the US population adamantly refuses vaccination, which is at least the number that adamantly refuses masking. Okay.
Well, at least it's a good way of mathematically manage the line for vaccination, right?
Yeah, right. There's no question. There's no question that the logic and the priority stack is going to drive some people towards it and some people against it. But we need it collectively to work, right? You don't want this thing bouncing around your schoolyard. If you let's say Pfizer has 90% efficacy, 1 out of 10 is not effective. a contagion is operates at an exponent. So we're at orders of magnitude of significance. We need collective universal. It took us years to wipe out polio and measles and yet some of these things are back because very intelligent people in Marin County who are high dollar earners religiously believe that Tamarisol and other parts of the vaccine are hurting the body. So I'm deeply concerned about the anti-vax thing. Now to go to the logistics, the good news on the Moderna vaccine is it doesn't require the level of refrigeration that the Pfizer vaccine requires. The Pfizer vaccine requires -80 degrees. Okay, so that is specialized, nitrogen freeze tanks that are usually only found in laboratories. They've substituted that for mobility with, the equivalent of dry ice, basically, and dry ice coolers. But that's still a major logistical operations to not allow for any flaws in the cooling and distribution of the vaccine. And the greater speed you go, the greater the fault rate. So they're estimating by the end of this year, not less than 20 million vaccinations will be given. That's good. If it's first responders and takes some relief onto the healthcare community, because right now in the United States, the healthcare community is at the edge of breaking point. And I would say by Thanksgiving or probably during Thanksgiving, and certainly going into the Christmas holidays, we will see the same photos that we saw out of New York in April. We will see hospital systems that are broken down. We will see mandatory lockdowns. We will see big protests against mandatory lockdowns. We are in a much larger second wave, multiples larger than what we faced in March and April. And that's competing with the amount of knowledge that's been gained by the healthcare community, but at the same time with the level of exhaustion and mental fatigue that healthcare providers are suffering. So we don't really know what we're going into as we move into the darkest part of the year. What we know is, based on experience and empiricism, we are going to have a lot more hospitalizations and potentially death rate before any of this abates. So I would expect relief more in the summer and in the fall of next year than any time in the next 6 months. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah, probably we'll have intense fourth quarter. And it's globally, right? Because it's faster. The first wave came slowly, right? We had a long period in Europe, then a long period in the US. And Brazil was behind the US, so it was a long period here. Now it's coming kind of all together. We are a little bit more optimistic with the vaccines just because we have a lot of respectable trials, right, in phase 3. It's we mentioned Moderna and Pfizer. We have AstraZeneca. We are testing here in the US the Chinese vaccine, which is a quite simple one, right? That virus technology, which is safer and simpler. So we are more constructive on that, even though that I truly respect the logistics issues and these anti-vaccines that we also have here in Latam. It's probably smaller and less vocal than US, but equally strange, right? Very difficult to understand how at this stage of our evolution we can go so much against science, right?
I mean, that's you and I work a lot on climate issues, and we talk about, the way we'll solve climate change is with our enlightened self-interest. If your enlightened self-interest won't allow you to protect your own health and the probability of illness and the potential of death by wearing a small disposable cloth on your face, what's the probability that you're up for saving the planet? I mean, this has been an incredible microcosm of sociological thinking. Like, what is happening amongst us? And I think you're right. It's we're not perhaps as evolved sociologically as we had given ourselves credit for.
Yeah, but changing, keeping the same topic, but changing the element of the discussion. Last time that we had lunch in New York, and you spoke to me about Elemental Labs, the firm that you founded and you are executive chairman. Which is an amazing a very interesting business initiative. Andy, could you explain to us a little bit what is, because Elemental is use science and nature-based solutions to solve modern problems. But with your own words, Andy, tell me about how Elemental and the objectives and the opportunities of something like Elemental Labs has in a world like this.
Yeah. Thanks, Andre. You know that Lorene Jobs actually co-founded this with us, and I spun this out of her organization, Emerson Collective, where at one time was Emerson Elemental, and Elemental Labs is much more deeply focused on addressing market imperfections that have yielded the problems that we face. That is to say, with climate and nature in particular. The ultimate health and security of all of us depends on the health and security of our habitat. How do we eat? How do we breathe? How do we drink and function in a healthy habitat, a healthy ecosystem? And just as we've had and faced down perils in water and food and energy, we have perils in our atmospheric protection. So much of the climate change discussion by rightful thinking enthusiasts to address the problem lacks the economic and financial acumen to engineer durable solutions that can reorient our systems. And unless and until we reorient our systems, then we everything else is trying to tithe. To take sort of the biblical phrase, we're just tithing our way into feeling like we're changing and addressing climate with a project here and with a project there. And then there's sort of the ideological approach that, well, capitalism is responsible for all this. So if we just did away with capitalism, we would win. But, we've already been through that in the 20th century, and relitigating that is sort of a waste of time that we don't have. We are a species that are enterprising, and we trade and we exchange and we market things quite naturally, and have since the anthropologist would tell you since the dawn of our species. And here we are with very sophisticated systems, and we have a tyranny of accounting that has us behaving in a certain way. And we need to alter that accounting system or those rule sets in ways that allow us to address externalities that are unaddressed. That's what I call a market imperfection. If you give business people, enterprising peoples, regular citizens, the opportunity to account for what is most vitally and important to them and integrate it into their systems for investing and profiting and earning rewards to do the right thing, they will. But of course, we haven't yet done that. So the technological piece of that is we've arrived at a time where we can measure and account for the role of nature. There's countries like Costa Rica that have been doing this for 30 years in a very rudimentary way on qualitative characteristics, and they call it payment for ecosystem services. Well, we don't have to do it qualitatively anymore, because now we have satellites that go up in arrays of 80 at a time that circle the Earth and show us a picture every 7 minutes. So you don't have to wait for a quarterly photo from Landsat at NASA to show you what something looks like. And that means with unbelievable precision and granularity, one could see a truck entering the rainforest, track with absolute accuracy its speed, and count how many trees are felled tree by tree. We can see that now. We can measure, monitor, manage, and ultimately monetize the value of that ecosystem. Because if you know that tree's mahogany and not southern pine, you know that it absorbs carbon at 10 times the weight per mass, right? So valuing a mangrove or part of the rainforest gives you a reason not to cut it down, because it's an asset that is measurable and on the balance sheet somewhere. I don't think this is a project we finish in our lifetime. I think it's the world, and it's a dynamic, interactive system. I think it's exciting to be at the threshold of where artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, all the things that I spoke of weren't in the statutes 13 years ago that I work on in our labs now. can with precision make more profitable aquaculture, because they can make the fish healthier and the coral reef systems healthier and know how they perform in real time. And as a free rider to enhancing the value of productivity in natural resource and commodity supply chains, one can also get the carbon content and the moisture content and the ecological health and begin to unitize and ultimately monetize nature. And so that's what Elemental Labs is up to. And interestingly, its support comes from people who are uniquely positioned from different sectors of the economy, because they have proximity insight to how financial markets work, how investments thrive, how accounting systems ought to operate, but also how technology can integrate into that to make a better whole. So it's unusual to find both rapacious capitalists and deeply committed conservationists who are looking for solutions. And Elemental Labs kind of gives that group a home.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I'm fan of the concept. And since the beginning, when we were talking about how to price the imperfections that climate change is bringing and use capitalism to cure effects of capitalism, it's a fascinating tool and way of addressing what probably could be the most important challenge of our species, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But moving, since we are going to this direction, I will move to something that probably better than anyone that I know, which is energy. By the way, I didn't mention in Andy extensive CV in the beginning. Andy was Subsecretary of Energy during the Bush administration. But more than that, he's a thinker. He's an innovator, a scientist, and in the energy sector. Andy, what transformation or key transformations you are seeing in how we generate, consume, and conceptually consider energy part of our lives? How you are seeing the energy scope, and then we develop from here.
Yeah, I think, well, I've long sort of pushed out the thesis before people thought it was viable, that there would be such growth at the edge in all of our devices, any kind of hardware, any kind of appliances, our vehicles, that basically we were moving towards a world where we're now arriving and can see it as one that has every device IP addressable, Wi-Fi connected, and either producing, storing, or consuming energy. That's a reality. That's not a reality that our legacy systems that have centrally been controlled and originated and regulated into existence are prepared to manage. So there's a bit of Wild West going on, and you can see it in the damage that the energy sector has taken on, not just with COVID, but if you look at their overall performance over 3, 5, and 10 years, you can see that it's been a wash, because they keep doing the same things in hope that they'll get a different result. There's a degree of madness in that, when the world, you can't actually have Elon Musk thriving and succeeding at that level of bet of the proliferation of electric vehicles and still invest in oil at subpar returns with diminishing returns and with a probability of a termination event in 20 or 25 years and expect to get the same results. So there's a lot.
It's simple. It's just look at the Shell market cap evolution in the last 5 years, and it's a good proof of what you just said, right?
Yeah, I mean, as it's turned out, the oil companies, big oil, major integrateds, certainly even more so. One could say in many ways they're more agile than many of the parastatal corporations, but they have demonstrably shown poor judgment in capital allocation, and it's all based on empiricism. And I used to have a good friend who was a great buddy, T. Boone Pickens, was quite an excitable guy. Just passed this last year, God rest his soul. And Boone used to say, if all you ever do is all you've ever done, all you'll ever get is all you ever got. and it was a great Texas saying. And I think that what they're finding is the diminishing returns. You know, that the Stone Age didn't end for a lack of stones. The petroleum age won't end for a lack of petroleum. And the amount of new energy production, consumption, and storage that is not originating in central distributed hands is by far overwhelming both utility systems and pipeline systems, and we will find some agile leadership emerge. I mean, I think this makes it a ripe moment for M&A, for activism. I think you can expect a lot to evolve in the energy sector amongst the companies in the next 24 and 36 months. I think you'll have first sort of the rebound snapback effect of COVID and commodities rising. But beyond that, there will be a deep filtered search for adaptive, agile leaders that embrace energy innovation and know how to integrate and incorporate data and compute into the projections of new, modified, and diversified business plans. I don't see much of that originating organically here in Texas. But at this, you know, ExxonMobil, when I left office, was the largest private corporation on earth. Today, it has a smaller market cap than Netflix. Okay, so it's sort of revealing in and of itself. These things have to happen for these corporations to survive and avoid a Kodak moment.
Yes, absolutely. And Andy, do you see U.S. moving to this more renewable or natural gas or any other? Because at the end of the day, you need to generate energy, right? We can have electric cars, but the cars need to be charged somewhere and somehow. You see U.S., which is, of course, a price maker of energy policies globally, moving to a more let's say modern matrix, or more, let's say, sustainable matrix. My question is both from the policy perspective and second on the effectiveness of what happened in Europe or even in emerging part of emerging markets. You see this transformation, this new transformation in US happening in the next decade?
Well, I think that the one thing we know about most of the people who form the circles around Joe Biden is that they are similar to the people who formed them around the Obama-Biden administration, and they were quite open and one could even say hospitable to the role of natural gas taking market share away from more carbon-intensive technologies or resources, I should say. And of course, you also have further out on the flank people who want an absolute ban on natural gas. And so it all boils down and distills into a discussion about energy transition. And most people talk about natural gas as a bridge fuel. And when you want to be peaceful at a party, you don't really talk about whether that bridge is the Golden Gate Bridge or whether that bridge is a rickety bridge that Indiana Jones holds on to as he crosses a ravine or something, right? It's just a bridge, and nobody knows how long the bridge is, and et cetera. But if you're talking about it volumetrically, mathematically, if you are trying to design an optimal energy transition, when you're talking about natural gas, in so many ways, you're actually talking about a race of energy density between a molecule of methane and a unit of storage, right? I mean, obviously, storage, achieving storage that irons out intermittency or is a co-partner to renewable development or emission-free sources is kind of the brass ring that everybody wants. But it's been very intractable. And we've been saying that we need a 10x improvement for 10 years for the last 10 years. And we're still saying it because we are swimming in natural gas. We have so much of it. And to my mind, that is a blessing until we get the technology in place. It's actually been manna from heaven in the sense that it has allowed for the scaling and of greater renewable penetration, whether they're partnering deliberately by design or not. It has been the partner where storage has not yet to appear in abundance on the scene. And it has displaced enormous amounts of coal-fired generation. And I would expect that to continue when demand resumes. All of that is against an overlay of efficiency and a much broader consensus on efficiency and productivity that has yielded far less consumption, and at the same time, device management at the edge. The more this is distributed out into corporations, big ones, Walmart and their supply chains, or Apple, or the big tech, or on the data centers, the more that there is more distributed management, we're finding the greatest efficiencies and the greatest zero emission mixes. So little microcosms of zero emission futures are emerging, but with very big companies and players and with very large communities. And so I'm quite confident that the energy transition is well underway, that Paris goals on energy can be met. There are outstanding questions, ones that Brazil will have to face in other parts of South America on big hydro, and that the United States and others will have to face on big hydro and nuclear. We have emission-free sources that the same advocates of zero emission energy and arriving at a net zero future are against. And I find it challenging that people would want to tear down or eliminate large-scale base load zero emission sources at the very moment that you really want to accelerate a net zero emission outcome. So I think, again, the same crowd that maybe it's not the same crowd, but the same characteristic that yields a logical flaw in enlightened interest has us with this unusual dichotomy where people don't want at the table the largest sources of emission-free power, reliable baseload that we have, and yet are demanding how fast you can go. So we need thinkers who are inclined towards the math and the science, and above all, understand both timeframes and cost curves. And that seems to be the missing piece in the discussion most of the time. How do you manage a time frame? And how do you manage for the time value of money, or I'd say the time value of carbon? And how do you manage a declining cost curves for technological investment? If you can get enough leaders to incorporate that into their thinking and not be ideologically stuck or driven by the political interest attached to one of the industries, then I think we can keep driving fast forward.
Yeah. Totally agree. Very good perspective. Andy, moving more to technology, as we know, and you are in the center of technology innovation as head strategist of Google X, right? And what are you seeing as what are the new breakthroughs, but not the next secret that will be launched in the market, but what is the direction of the wind in terms of breakthroughs in technology, as we know, right? Mass scale technology. I'm not thinking about the next innovation on space trips, but technology, as we know, in a mass sense. What do you think are the key breakthroughs coming? What will be the next transformation that will change our society, or that will move us to new levels of connection, productivity, or comfort? How you are seeing?
Well, I'm often quoted as saying that data is the new oil. That what oil was to the 20th century, and it didn't start in the 20th century, it started in the 19th century, but it wasn't until the 20th century that it effectively won wars. It effectively changed whole economies. It effectively transitioned the way that we communicate and transport goods and services and everything else. Oil has been the lifeblood of the global economy, and it has been the source of all value and growth at its base, at its source, and that era of that has provided the robustness of the industrial age of the last 120, 130 years is rapidly being eclipsed, and I would say has been accelerated in being eclipsed by an information age that has arrived. And in that information age, the value of data will be the ultimate source of sadly what wins and loses wars, but also what achieves the best for us as humanity. And you can see that right now in what we're doing now. We're globally connected, but beyond that, we're in the middle of a global pandemic that 15 years ago, we would not have had this umbilical cord tether to economic activity. No amount of oil or natural resources would have been able to sustain communications and a global community in the way that we're speaking together right now, as if it was no big deal. But it is a big deal because one can see in the market cap of the so-called FANGs, or the my neighbors in the tech community, just by volume of market cap or by dominance of the marketplace, that they are getting an ever larger footprint with ever larger balance sheets that of course will be questioned through government action as we move forward, but that is where the global competition will be. So what promulgates success coming from them? Because none of them can afford to, even in the ideal position that the tech companies are in, none of them can afford to be static. Their world moves very, very fast. So it's not just a grab for market share, it's actually performance and yield from what it is your data does for you. Okay. And that's going to be a lot more than social media and delivery of pizza. Okay. That's going to be whole systems change. And so if we look at the base, then to your question of what's new, what's evolving, what's consequential and differentiated, if you look at the base of that, there is no question that artificial intelligence and its close cousin, machine learning, are the consequential change. And I say that not because they're buzzwords, but because we have a reality that Moore's law is decelerating. There is a physical reality. We've been, doubling every couple years the net productivity and the decline on cost in an exponential way for compute. Well, we're running out of how small we can make things. Once you get down to a single atom, that you are manipulating the performance of a single atom. Now think of that. Okay, think of the Manhattan Project in my father's lifetime to win a world war by unleashing global explosive capacity of a nuclear weapon, of splitting an atom that nobody could see, that we didn't have an electron microscope that could see it, an atom. We just had a theory and guys on chalkboards who were super smart who said if we split it, unbelievable destructive capacity will be done. And then later on, we said, well, if we split it and harness it and hold it, we can heat up a bunch of steam and we can make electrons. That's what we did with an atom, 70 years ago. Okay. But today we have factories with atoms that manipulate and lay them down one by one to construct, atomic level machine operations to manipulate data and information. But we're down to almost a singular atom. So necessarily, we're decelerating Moore's law. It is flattening. And what takes it higher is the interaction and performance of inference and learning of a discrete set of new chips that are learning. And now the question is, how fast can they learn? Can they get to learn to the level of a human? Well, certainly to the level of a human that won't be vaxxed, or cover their face with a mask, but at what level is machine learning exceeding human learning to the degree that productivity climbs at exponential paces? We are right now immediately on the cusp of that. And so some of the manifestations that I alluded to earlier that I'm excited about for Elemental Labs, but I'm also excited for Google X, and I'm also excited for Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland and others. Is we have robotics that can move through a field of berries today, and photograph each berry at lightning speed and know its ripeness and know its scent and see its whether it's diseased and check the plant's growth and understand with precision how those agroeconomics are working, and at the same time get the soil carbon, the moisture content, the ambient conditions, and everything else. Okay, so that's a world away from where John Deere was 15 years ago. And it's the same with the salmon and with the Norwegians, and people are worried we're running out of fish, but they don't understand that aquaculture is now overwhelmingly the majority of what we eat. So how do we keep that disease free and insulate it from the wild catch, and ensure that as we harvest more and more protein for more needs of humanity, that it's done in a climate sustainable way and as productive and healthy as possible? Well, AI is going to give us that when it's put together with sensors and data and compute and intelligent systems of commodity delivery, logistics, etc. So we're not going away, no matter how ideological the world becomes. We're not going away from a world that has shrunk and is interactive and interdependent on one another for a global commons to feed itself and nourish itself. And we're going to need the fullest power of AI, machine learning, and big compute. So I'm tremendously excited about these things because they weren't available to us 10 and 15 years ago when we were imagining the future. And at the scariest point where you say, can our hardware compute can we double it again? And you start going, well, maybe we can't physically double it, but we can make the manifestations of its existing state so much greater by having it learn. And so I find that to be the most exciting, differentiated thing that will change all sectors.
Yeah, no, it's quite exciting way of describing that. I will ask a simple but last question, Andy. You are not a portfolio manager, but you're a very smart guy. Every time that the cost of opportunity goes to zero, the cost of dreaming go to infinite, right? Do you think there is excess valuations on innovation or on technology in the market? So it's just a stage of something new that we don't know exactly how to price.
Again, I'm not a portfolio manager. You can discount this appropriately. I think I'll tell you what I personally, I think it's a bit frothy out there. I think you characterized rightfully to me very well at the very beginning of this, which is that we have a bifurcation between financial crisis and economic crisis. And the financial crisis, at least in the United States, we had a playbook for. We had the old Ben Bernanke playbook of shower capital on it. And we can, because we have the world's printing machine and the reserve currency. And since used to be you'd break glass here in case of emergency, and now the only emergency really, yes, there's a pandemic, but the bigger thing is that you need to print when you don't have the discipline to constrain your spending or don't have the will or courage to increase your revenue. So if you can't increase your revenue or constrain your spending, you try to print your way out of it. So in the melange between we are addressing a crisis and the laziness of leadership that is being substituted by the printing machine, we're having a debate over how many trillions we can shower onto the financial markets. And if you hook up the financial markets with a zero cost of capital, cheap IV into the veins of trading, there's very few places for capital to go other than what it wants to speculate on. So for me, when you're at 30 and 40x PE multiples on stuff, I mean, maybe I'm old school, but I don't think that that's sufficiently durable. And do I think other great innovations will pop and there's still bargains to be had? Yes. Do I think it's the speculation on a Chinese company on battery swapping for cars based on a model that failed in the U.S. 15 years ago is worthy of to 4,000% gains? No. And so I think we're going to come back to earth a little bit with the vaccines. We have a light at the end of the tunnel that's getting a little brighter. We can't gauge how long the tunnel is, but we can definitely gauge that is light. And if we go to it consistently, we can get to it efficiently and we can normalize things. That's the aspiration. And I think when that normality comes, there's probably a snapback effect on commodities that one could expect naturally, but also some equilibrium and adjustment of how we see the premiums on some of these things.
Yeah. Well, Andy, as we committed 1 hour, well, Thank you very much. As always, very constructive, bright conversation. I'm missing our personal conversations, my friend.
Me
It's
too.
very
It's
good to
always
chat
so
with
enjoyable.
you.
You're
Yeah.
such a great leader, Andres. I learned so much from you. Next time I'm going to do a lot more listening than talking. But I give my best wishes to your family and hope you're well.
I have good wishes for you too, my friend, and
All right.
especially to your father.
Okay,
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you. Have
Thanks.
a good night. Bye-bye, my friend.
Bye-bye. Take care.